Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Liam Rose. I'm an author, mentor, life coach, motivational speaker, evangelist, musician, activist. In the SGR podcast, I've been sharing this podcast to inspire humanity to learn about music, media and entertainment. I've also been sharing this SGR podcast to inspire humanity to learn more about spiritual music and being a spiritual musician. And I've also been sharing the SGR podcast to help people who want to learn more about music, creation, and how to be a spiritual musician and live for Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha in faith, spirituality, faith, and religion. Now, within this specific podcast and audio, we're going to be sharing spiritual music is spiritual life journey. So, a lot of spiritual music is a spiritual life journey. So, as a spiritual musician, you'll be making spiritual music on your spiritual life journey. So, for all musicians and artists, songwriters, singers, producers, artists, rappers, and music producers, your spiritual music is your spiritual legacy within life and your spiritual life journey. Now, all musicians start from somewhere, right? And as a musician, we record music, we create music, and we write and we perform and do music. But when you get to the point within your life when you're making spiritual music is conscious music. Conscious music is more faithful and spiritual. When you make spiritual music, conscious music, faithful music, truthful music, of who you are as a musician, artist, singer, songwriter, or producer. That is when your spiritual life journey begins. And a spiritual life journey begins by going on the journey. All musicians are on a journey, sharing their music, sharing their songs, their productions, their beats, their instrumentals. And as a musician, we're on a journey. So we want to make sure as a musician that we're making spiritual music. Now, I think it was a couple of years ago now, or a couple of months ago, I actually made a video about, and audio about create spiritual music. It's so important, right? And I've always tried to inspire this in what I do, because I am a musician as a spiritual musician, and the songs, the beats, the instrumentals, and the music that I make is all very spiritual. It has a spiritual, conscious essence to it, right? So as a musician, we want to make spiritual music. Now, I've always said that music is a talent and a gift. But if we don't use our talent and gifts to make spiritual music, conscious music, then the listeners won't listen to the spiritual music and the spiritual consciousness of the music. Now, when I say this, I mean your music has to be conscious. It has to be very spiritual, yeah? Now, for a spiritual musician, you will have to discover a way to make spiritual music, which each musician records differently in a studio and makes different tracks, beats, instrumentals, and songs, right? But you have to find what is spiritual in the studio when you create your beats, your instrumentals, or your songs. Music is a spiritual thing because it's leaving something behind. All musicians need to create spiritual music, which I try to do myself as a musician myself. I'm not just someone that just says this in a podcast and audio and doesn't live it myself. I actually am a spiritual musician. I make spiritual music. Now, focus on the contributions your music is going to make if it's spiritual, right? If it's conscious and spiritual, then it'll have like a meaning and value to the music you're creating. Each song, each beat, each instrumental, each track will have meaning and value to it, which are called a consciousness. There's a difference between there's a big difference between like worldly music and spiritual music. Worldly music is talking about like money, house, cars, possessions, just worldly things, which is worldly music, right? Spiritual music talks about faith, spirituality, faith, religion, Jesus Christ, Jehovah, Buddha, spiritual, truthful, faithfulness sort of things. So sometimes within our lives, we need to change from worldly music into spiritual music. Now, I'm not saying this is an easy spiritual life journey to go on, because even I've discovered it as a musician, and I have to say it's been one of the most difficult things to change for me as well. It's been very difficult. But as I'm aware with spiritual music, it's meant to be sharing conscious messages to the listeners. All musicians have followers, all musicians have listeners, right? So we need to inspire them, right? And the only way we can inspire them is by making spiritual music, conscious music, music that inspires the listeners when they listen to the music, right? So it shouldn't be about money, it shouldn't be about success, it shouldn't be about a hustler or a grinder. It shouldn't be about it shouldn't be about like lust or love or romance. I don't think those things are spiritual. When you make spiritual music, it should be about consciousness, faith, spirituality, faith, religion, Jesus Christ, Jehovah, Buddha, helping other people, giving back, making a difference. Spiritual music. So that's a massive spiritual life journey we need to go on as a musician. And I think all musicians need to go on that journey. I'm not saying you can't make impactful music when you just write about certain things, because as a musician it's part of your life, because you have that gift, you have that ability to write a song and produce a beat and an instrumental, and that's your talent, that's your skill, and it's really good, and we get that. It's really encouraging, it's really motivational, good. But if you want to leave your spiritual legacy now and do something for Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha, and do something that's it's just so important to make spiritual music. It's just very important. If you want to, then change the way you create your music, which is the first place to start. Change what you talk about, change what you produce, change the way you make your songs and your instrumentals, change the way you write your songs and perform your songs, and how you are as a musician. And then slowly, it takes a number of years to get to this point as a spiritual musician. As a spiritual musician, you can see that, like, I don't want to say this in a odd way, but I want to say this to really help those musicians. Hundreds to thousands to, even if you get to that point, maybe even millions of songs and beats and instrumentals and songs you've created, all has that consciousness in it, all has that spirituality in it, all has that faith within it. Some musicians, as I'm aware of this, I'm very aware of this as a spiritual musician myself, they do go into religion to make spiritual music, so their music is part of their religion, right? And I'm not saying that all musicians are like that. Some musicians are, yeah. When they make music as part of their religion, which is fine. I have like no issues with that, and if it's part of your religion to make that type of religious music, that's fine. I'm talking about spiritual music. I'm talking about faithful music. I'm talking about truthful music and spiritual music. So if you do it in like religious organizations, that's fine. And like I said, I don't have a problem with that, or I have nothing against that if that's part of the way you make your spiritual music. But as a spiritual musician, you just need to go on a spiritual change and a spiritual life journey. Music is one of those careers and one of those like paths where it's so inspirational, because as a musician you're always creating, yeah? So it's so inspirational, yeah? But there's a slight difference, like I said earlier, between the worldly music and the spiritual music. And the spiritual music is completely different. It has meaning behind it. It has purpose behind it. It has value behind it. It's conscious in some way. It's sharing messages, sharing storytelling, sharing songs, producing different types of sounds. Music is very, very different. So spiritual music, as a spiritual musician, create that every single day. And with music, as I'm very aware of it, you have to do it daily. You know, as if you're a musician, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Every musician works in a studio in some kind. Yeah, so you have a studio, you work in it, you do your music, whatever it is. And I'm not saying I'm trying to convert every single musician just to do spiritual music. You can do it if you choose to do it. It's up to the musician, and not just me as a podcaster saying it in a podcast. It's not up to me as a podcaster saying it in a podcast. It's up to the musicians themselves. Make spiritual music. When you perform, do spiritual songs. When you write, make spiritual songs. When people listen to it, followers, fans, listeners, it should be sharing conscious messages, spiritual messages, conscious, faithful, spiritual, truthful. And that's the journey of what we say spiritual music. So spiritual music is a spiritual life journey. As a spiritual musician, your music's going to grow, you will evolve, you will learn more things about the music you're creating, as all musicians do. The topics you talk about will change. It should, if it's very spiritual and like faithful, it should be talking about like faith, spirituality, faith, religion, truth, helping other people, giving back, spirituality. Something that's spiritual. So it should be very, very spiritual. And when it's spiritual, that's when it has the meaning and the value. And that's when it becomes conscious. Music's one of those industries that's hard to find what's the spiritual music. Some people have said, you know, spiritual music is normally meditation music or mindfulness music. No, as a spiritual musician, you can make spiritual music in all different ways. Even I've done it as a spiritual musician. So it's not just meditation and mindfulness music. It could be religious music. It could be hip hop. It could be R&B. It could be rap. It could be soul. It could be pop. It could be jazz. It could be indie. There's as music has so many genres, you can still make spiritual music in any genre, because spiritual music doesn't have spiritual music doesn't have a genre. So I'll just repeat that again. Spiritual music doesn't have a genre. So it could be in any genre. But the message that I'm trying to get across today in this podcast and audio, which is spiritual music is a spiritual life journey. And it's going to evolve. Your music's going to evolve. What you talk about is going to evolve. What you share is going to evolve. It will evolve. It will change. Alright? So I've always said to spiritual musicians, go on the spiritual journey. And when you go on the spiritual life journey of spiritual music, then that's where you make more of a difference and an impact. And as a musician, this is what I'm aware of as a musician, right? I am aware of this, and I'm just an indie musician, so I'm not famous or anything like that. Actually, I'm not famous or anything like that, so I'm not gonna say I am when I'm not. I'm just an indie musician doing things independently, right? So I'm no record label. I'm not a signed artist. I'm not in a major major. I'm not in a major or indie record label or anything like that. I'm just like an independent artist doing my music. But what I'm aware of is that, which I've learned with music especially, right? And I've learned this in music especially. Musicians have a following. Musicians have a lot of listeners. Musicians have they can become celebrities, right? Now, the question that we have to ask ourselves before we finish: if we're going to make spiritual music, which is a spiritual life journey, when we reach I shouldn't say this in the podcast, but I want to say this in the podcast. When we reach that status, that fame, that fortune as a musician, yeah, did we reach that fame, that success, that fortune from doing spiritual music, which is conscious music? And as a spiritual musician, you have to make spiritual music which is conscious. Conscious music is normally spiritual, faithful, truthful, impactful, inspirational, and motivational, which is normally talking about faith, spirituality, faith, religion, Jesus Christ, Jehovah, Buddha, helping other people, giving back, making a difference. And all, just as a musician, you're creating it, right? So I always say to musicians, and in my podcasts and my audios and my messages, try your best to create spiritual music. Try your best to go on the journey. As a musician, I don't want to go too deep into like my story as a musician or anything like that. As a musician, I've been doing music for a number of years. I was sort of like a hip hop artist, a rap artist at the beginning. Started to sort of perform and record and make albums, mixtapes, EPs, singles, and songs and instrumentals and beats and that sort of thing. And then life changed as I changed, evolved as a human being, evolved as a musician, became a spiritual musician, and then my spiritual music also evolved, and then the content of my music changed. Before I was talking about, how successful I am, money, girls, relationships, romance, possessions, holidays, cars, houses, money, clothes, crime, gangs, culture. As a musician, you write about so many different things. So there's so many different things I was recording back then. Then when I started to be a spiritual musician and my music changed, what I talked about changed. I saw the music changing as I was evolving, because as a spiritual musician, you're always evolving. Your music doesn't stay. Like, for example, when I was younger, my music wasn't the same as it is today. It's not the same type of music I make. It's very different, because like I said, I don't want to go into my story or anything like that. It's just very, very different to how it was when I was younger. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm not a musician, and that doesn't necessarily mean I don't make spiritual music. I'm just saying that you evolve, you change. It's like how life is, isn't it? Life is evolving and changing. So you evolve, you change, your music changes, what you talk about changes, your songwriting changes, your beats, your instrumental changes, and your life changes. So it's important to learn that spiritual music is important. And when you gain more, like I said earlier, status, fame, and fortune as a musician, if you get to that point, and there's like probably thousands and millions of musicians that are independent, who don't have a following, who are not celebrities, and that are not having no fortunes or not famous at all, which is fine. As a musician, you want to start the journey as soon as possible. So create spiritual music. Music is a gift for those musicians who create it. Music is not it's not something that everybody can do, because you have to be a certain type of person to create music. So not every person is a music sort of artist. Some are, some are not, which is fine. All I'm saying within this podcast and this audio today is just very important to create spiritual music, which is a spiritual life journey. As your music changes, you will change. As you change, you will evolve. As you evolve, what you talk about within your songs, within your beats, within your instrumental changes. But it's like I said earlier, like spiritual music doesn't have a genre. So, and it's also not, like I said earlier, also it's not meditation music or mindfulness music or religious music. I'm not saying that those types of music isn't spiritual, because it is spiritual, but as a musician you're unique to yourself. So find who you are as a musician, create the music you want to create, whatever it is. It could be in any genre, as long as it has that conscious side to it. If it has that conscious side to it, faithful, spiritual, truthful, impactful, motivational truth behind the music you're making, then that will inspire the listeners who listen to it. And as a musician, as you already know, whoever listens to this podcast and audio, the musicians always have a following. The musicians always have people that watch their music and listen to their music. The musicians always have people that like their songs, their beats, and their instrumentals as a musician. The only difference is, how's your influence going to be? It's a very important question, and I want all the musicians to figure it out. How is your influence going to be? The influence, because as a musician, some of the musicians get famous, fortune, become celebrities, but your influence, will you be remembered in your music? And just before we finish, spiritual music is also a spiritual legacy. It's like a gift. When you're a musician, it's really a gift, because I know so many people want to get into music, and I know so many people love music, and I think everyone loves music to some degree. Only those musicians that have this quality that I'm talking about, which is a spiritual music, can really find something that's spiritual, right? When you find something that's spiritual, then that makes it more conscious, because it's about the influence you're providing to the listeners. When you focus on the influence you're providing to the listeners, which is spiritual music, then it becomes more conscious. And when it's more conscious, it's like you can, as a musician, you can make probably like hundreds to thousands of songs and beats and instrumentals, but it all has that consciousness within it. And that's basically what I'm trying to explain in this podcast and audio today. The consciousness within your music, there must be a meaning to it. There must be a value to it. It has to have something that's going to get the listeners thinking and loving the song or the beats or the instrumentals or the songwriting you're doing. So that consciousness to it, that spiritual side to it, that faithful side to it is very important as a spiritual musician. So I really do hope more spiritual musicians are able to do it. I really do hope. And when you do spiritual music, if you do want to go on the journey with it, keep making spiritual music. So you have albums, EPs, mixtapes, singles that all have that spiritual essence to it, spiritual um, consciousness to it, which is very important. So all spiritual musicians, need to make spiritual music if that's something you want to do. And I did say in the podcast and audio as well, it depends on the musicians that want to do it. Some do, some don't. Um, this is life, isn't it? So I can't like tell a musician just make spiritual music and that's what you should do as your music career. Each musician is on a journey. Each musician is on a journey, and we all are. So we're all discovering our gifts, our talents. You know, yeah, our gifts, our talents. How we want to create our songs and our music and our beats, and it's fine. It's fine. The only thing I'm trying to get across in this podcast and audio is spiritual music is very important, and we need to find that consciousness within the music that we make. And I will say this before we finish: your life is like a story as a musician. Let me repeat it again. Your life is like a story as a musician, which is spiritual life journey. So, as a spiritual musician, as an artist, rapper, songwriter, producer, artist, musician, rapper, songwriter, and any type of artist, your life is like a story. Your music is your life if you are a musician, which it is, right? So how do you want to influence? How do you want it to be? How do you want to influence your music? Think about it. Think about it as a musician. Think about it as an artist. And think about, okay, I want to do music. I want to go on this path in life. I want to be a musician, share my music, have a following, have fans, have followers, have listeners, people finding who I am, discovering who I am, searching for the music I'm creating. And then think about, instead of thinking about as a musician how it's going to be for you, think about how is it going to be for the listener. What are they going to learn from your music? How is it going to transform their life? What would they discover? How would it teach them lessons? What would it show them? How would it inspire them, motivate them? And when you think of your spiritual music like that, then each of your tracks and your beats, your instrumentals and your songs always have meaning and value. But it goes back to what I've normally said before. You have to change your spiritual music. You have to change it. And you have to change as a musician to get to that point. I'm not saying that musicians can't do amazing music, and that's the gift of music. It's amazing. Music is. It's one of those paths in life that is so inspirational. Even I'm inspired by all different types of music, and I'm just a young person. I'm inspired by music. I am, but you gotta find the spiritual music which is right for you. And as a musician, only you will know that. All musicians will know that. You have to find what's right for you. What do you want to create? How do you want to rap? How do you want to sing? How do you want to songwrite? How do you want to produce? How do you want to perform? How do you want to make music? How do you want to do it? But your influence matters as a musician. So you have to find what type of influence you want to be for others within your music, which is important as a musician because you're always going to get people that are listening to your music and listening to what you create. So that's part of being a musician. But your influence is important to those listeners. So when you create spiritual music as a conscious thing, you're really focusing on the listener. How is this song going to impact their life? How is this production going to help them? How is this melody or this ad-lib or this verse or this chorus or this instrumental or this beat or this intro or this outro going to help them in their journey? So think about it. I think I'm finished for this podcast and audio today. I think this one was a bit longer than I thought, but it's okay. Just remember that spiritual music is a spiritual life journey. Not all musicians go on that journey as a musician, which is fine. It's okay. I think it's something as a musician has to discover in their own journey. But if you do want to impact lives and help people on their journey as a musician, and it goes back to what I said earlier within spiritual music. Spiritual music is normally faith, spirituality, faith, religion. Talking about Jesus Christ, Jehovah Buddha, spirituality, faith, sometimes helping other people depending on what type of musician you are, and really things that are meaningful, that are purposeful, that are valuable towards others. And that's a very beautiful thing. And, there's no important gifts than sharing your gifts to the world and having people listen to the conscious music you're creating. So it's so important. Okay, that's it for this podcast and audio today. I could have gone longer, but it's okay. Thank you for listening. Have a good day. I hope you do somehow make spiritual music and focus on that conscious music you can create as a spiritual musician. Okay, thank you now. Bye.